Yep.
Well, we can't seem to get a camera working for some reason, so you don't have to look at my ugly face today.
Well, just raise your hand on the little thing, or just
I will.
just say, chair or something, and then I'll let you know. So let's go ahead and start the meeting, and I welcome everyone today. Good morning, happy Friday, everyone, and a happy Flag Day to everyone. Important. I was reading about Betsy Ross this morning. It was interesting. So I want to wish everyone a happy Friday and happy Flag Day. This is the Legislative Committee for the Colorado Forest Health Advisory Council, and I welcome you all. We call this meeting to order. And Courtney, do you mind taking the roll call?
No, I will. I'll roll down the list now. Samantha Albert.
Present.
Morning, Samantha. Christy Belton.
I'm here. Morning.
Morning, Christy. Katie McGrath Novak. Pat Dorsey. Director Matt McCombs, our designee.
Good morning.
Morning, James. Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally.
Present.
Morning, Jody. Mark Morgan.
Here.
Morning, Mark. Julie Stensel is excused. Vice Chairman Sullivan Whiteskunk. Commissioner Veronica Medina. I see you there, Commissioner. Okay.
Here, thanks.
And Allison Lurch is also excused. And it looks like Katie just joined, so we do have quorum this morning.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. Appreciate that. So the next item of our agenda is approval of the minutes. Did anyone have a chance to look through the minutes, and if you have any changes or additions, please let me know. If not, I welcome a motion to approve the minutes. In a second.
So move.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. The motion is second. Any other further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Let's move on to our next item on our agenda, and we thank Daphne. Hello, Daphne. It's nice to see you. I haven't seen you as much this year, and welcome. We have invited Daphne Gervais to kind of help just share all the avenues of how legislative process works, and it can be a wild and crazy process at the end. And just trying to share some insights and some, since Daphne pretty much lives in the hallways for 4 months, I thought it'd be great. We thought it'd be great to kind of have her share how this process works. And so some of us are very familiar, but there's always something new to learn. So Daphne, I'll let you just take it away. And if you have anyone, raise your hand if you have questions, and we'll let Daphne kind of present. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner Shattuck McNally. It's great to see you, and hi, Forest Health Council Ledge Committee. It has been a while, so good to see all of your faces, especially in a not active legislative session time of the year when things are a little bit more normal. For those of you I don't know, my name is Daphne Gervais. I am the Director of Legislative Affairs here with the Department of Natural Resources. So I work closely with James and his team, and also cover all of DNR's other divisions from water, energy, wildlife, and all the rest. So I spoke with Courtney about what would really be helpful for you all and the discussion this morning, and understand that really the target of this conversation this morning is to make sure that you all have a solid grasp on what the different avenues are for Forest Health Council recommendations to potentially move forward. So I understand that you guys kind of go through this exercise every year to develop some policy recommendations, and that is no small feat, and want to make sure that you're aware of some different tracks that those might be able to move forward. So I really think that there are, in my mind, at least 4 different avenues for Forest Health Council recommendations to potentially move forward. The first one I'll mention is one that I think you all are very familiar with through the Wildfire Matters Review Committee, which is a legislative interim committee. I think they have about 10 to 12 members every year. They are an interim committee focused on wildfire and forest health issues that typically begin meeting in July, and their meetings span through the summer into the fall, typically until like September or October. I think you all know that that interim committee is granted 5 bills that they can move forward as sort of Wildfire Matters Review Committee endorsed policies. So committee members on that committee, they typically suggest anywhere from like 10 concepts or more. And then through the process, they will have to whittle those down and prioritize 5 bills to move forward as committee bills. So I think you will typically have an opportunity to present to that committee. Commissioner Shattuck McNally, I think you have done that in past years and really outlined the work of the Forest Health Council and how you all developed your policy recommendations and what those recommendations actually are. So I think that track is definitely one to continue exploring and working through. I believe you all do this, but if you don't already, certainly transmitting the Forest Health Council's annual report with those recommendations to all of the committee members here would be a great way for them to sort of noodle around those and see if they want to pick any of them up. I'm going to keep running through sort of the different tracks that I see, but please, if you've got a question along the way, don't hesitate to jump in, Commissioner.
I have a quick question. So you said that we can forward those, or I wondered if we, to the committee members, but should we wait until they have their committee, or does the Forest Health Council do that directly? Because I'm curious about that, because I didn't know if that's something we should do as one body, if we all kind of sent them, because I do know 2 of the new members are from my county and they've already contacted me, and I have not sent those to them. I talked to them at length because they're kind of new and this is kind of not their area of expertise per se, and so they've been asking me questions. So I'm just curious. I don't know what our policy as a committee or as a council, what does that look like to be contacting them individually? Just curious. Not that I did, they called me. So
yeah, no, definitely hear that question. Well, first I will mention that I think you all's annual report comes out mid-session, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, that's about like in the crazy time of the year for those of us working in the legislative space. So something that I did raise with Courtney is you all could consider sending that back over to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee around this time of year when they're just kind of in the planning phase and starting to think about what policies they might want to move forward, because things really get lost in the heat of the session, and they're getting blasted with emails every day. So I think it certainly makes sense to transmit it when it's available, but also might be good to bump it up around this time of year when they're starting to think about legislation for the following year. And then I'm trying to remember exactly how we've done that in the past, but I believe I have been sort of a liaison between you all and the legislators and have had a role in transmitting it to them. I think I'd be happy to continue doing that if that would be helpful. It might be something that I'd want to talk to Courtney about, but I also don't see real hurdles or obstacles, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, if you as the chair wanted to also transmit those reports. And then, I think I would leave it to you all to determine, to what extent you'd want to pick up any questions that you get from legislators after transmitting the report and how to handle inquiries like that. Does that answer your question?
yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because I wasn't sure if you were suggesting just sending just the recommendations, but I certainly, as an individual commissioner, once the report becomes public, I certainly download it and hand it and give it to all of our legislators, because we have a legislative agenda and coordinator now, and we have a meeting with all of them. We invite them all, and we had almost all, including Representative Mike Litch came last year, and so I handed them all hard copies and did a little discussion about that. But most of the questions I've had from the new ones, though one of them has been watching the new formation of the Forest Health Council from the beginning. They've just asked about, what is where did it start and where's it on the website and what's this, what is the Forest Health Council? So one of them, they had questions just like that. And so I was trying to steer them to the website and look in our meetings and read all of that. So that's mostly the questions I've had. And so I mostly just refer them to the old plan. So I guess that's a question after you present, when do we think we'll have that new one out to send to them? And just things like that. But I appreciate it. And I see Mr. Morgan has his, thank you for clarifying that, Daphne. Mr. Morgan, I see your hands raised.
Yes, one quick question. If legislators, in the past, we kind of had a policy of, we spoke with one voice as a committee or as a council. If you have legislators that contact you directly on questions, what's the format for that? What's our policy?
Sorry, did I cut you off?
What is our policy for that? I don't want to be non-responsive to people. That doesn't help us either, but what is our policy for that?
Thanks for that question, Mr. Morgan. And I'll say you're getting into Forest Health Council internal policy that I might not be fully in tune with. But, in my opinion, I would say that it does make sense for the Forest Health Council to have a single point of contact and sort of streamline communication and be a liaison to the extent that legislators reach out directly. So I think, if Jody as chair is willing to do that, you could always send inquiries to her. But also would welcome, Courtney or anybody else's thoughts on how that's been done in the past.
And I'm just curious, since most of them were high level there, because one of them was just asking, when did this Forest Health Council start? What was the legislation that enacted it? Where is the website? Those were the things that I was asking. So I figured those were fairly benign questions, and we are already formally approved our recommendations. And I said they would be coming forward to the council. So I haven't really shared those specifically, but a lot of them, I guess they've been taking some water tours or something. So I mostly, talked to Forest Health in general, but mostly their questions were also specifically what I've been doing as an individual commissioner up here with the burn area and stuff. So I think most of their questions, the new ones, have been very, very high level general, because one of them wanted to know the exact legislation of how this council got started, which I thought was an interesting question. So what do you think, Courtney?
Yeah, I think we're sort of on the same page about that things that have been publicized or approved by the council, I imagine are safe for any council members to discuss, like to share the list of recommendations or to share the priority list or things that have been approved by the council. I'd say questions that are more nuanced, it would be nice if they were passed through one or two people just to make sure that the answers are aligned with some of the more detailed conversations we've been having.
Thanks, Courtney. Thank you, Daphne. Appreciate it. Sorry to stop your momentum there, but go ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Morgan, for your question.
No worries. And feel free to ask more questions as we go along here. So in addition to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee, which I know you all are pretty familiar with, another track that you all could explore is just having an individual legislator pick a recommendation up. So every legislator in the General Assembly gets 5 bill titles. They typically start thinking about those now and tend to have their first 5 bill concepts picked out, either at a high level or maybe it's something they've been thinking about for years and they know exactly what they're going to be doing, but they tend to have an idea of what those 5 bills are going to be by, I would say, like late summer, early fall. Sometimes you do have new legislators or those that are filling vacancy seats that come in later into the process, and they won't have their 5 bills until, the winter. So it's pretty fluid, but generally I would say, they are thinking about it this time of year. I guess I bring this avenue up because not every legislator that has an interest in forest health and wildfire issues has a seat on the Wildfire Matters Review Committee. I think a lot of them do want to do some work in this space, but may not really have the policy expertise. So I think the annual report and the recommendations that you all put out are a really great resource to those folks. Yeah, Commissioner.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because I think if we all remember last session or last round, not all of our recommendations got taken up by the interim committee. And that was, I think, remember I asked that question, is there a way to have another, you know, what is the policy or how the process of us contacting another legislator who had interest in this to see if they wanted to take this up. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that was something I've always had a question on, if that interim committee, you know, has their priorities, which is they're all important bills, right? It's not like they're not, they're doing all they can too. I'm not suggesting they're not picking up the right ones. I'm just saying it's probably hard to choose. I know it's hard to choose. And so I'm wondering, when I asked that last year, I'm glad to hear that that's an opportunity. And so do we need to have, Courtney and everyone, what does that look like? And do we do that as a council? And how does that look? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, great question. And I'll take a first stab and hand it over to my colleague James. But, you know, DNR often does transmit reports of, you know, various sorts to the General Assembly as a whole. You know, there is a way to communicate via email to all of the legislators. It's not an email address that they advertise, but there is a way to do that. So I think in that case, you know, I, as the liaison for the department, could transmit the annual report to all of the members of the General Assembly, or you as chair, Shattuck McNally, you could do that. But I think that's probably the most appropriate avenue, is just to put it out there to all of them. And then if they reach out and they want to learn more or have questions about anything in particular, they could do that. But James, what do you think?
I'm not opposed to that. I think the larger question that I wanted clarification for this group is a lot of these bills do kind of affect the State Forest Service. And I don't want to get ahead of like any process at DNR or ahead of the governor. And so like specifically, I'm not saying this is one, but like this FIRWORM recommendation, if it doesn't get picked up, how should this committee, should they want to pursue it with individual legislators, how should they pursue that? So that way the Forest Service isn't like getting ahead of like a legislative or a budget request, something like that.
Yeah. And I was kind of going to get to the point later of like, if there are several different tracks that pick something up, how can those two kind of merge together? Or are there cases where two could potentially conflict? You know, I think it's always a good rule of thumb that if a legislator is picking something up, or, you know, some other entity, like there's homework associated with that. Like it's really doing your due diligence to reach out to the state agencies or the other entities that are affected by the bill. So I think, you know, that would kind of naturally happen through the process. If it's a legislator that's been in this space for a while, you know, there could always be a case where a legislator is running forward with something and, you know, you all or somebody else has concerns. And I think that happens very often in the legislative space. And, you know, it's a process to either get on the same page, or, you know, worst case scenario, sometimes you'll have entities that are opposed to the effort. But I would say, you know, in my experience, generally that stuff tends to work itself out. And yeah, so I think I would just encourage for anybody that's picking up the recommendations to do that homework, to do like stakeholder engagement, including with whoever's going to be implementing what is in the recommendation, and trying to avoid those hurdles, but recognizing that they could happen along the way too.
So if I might, I'm sorry to ask so many questions. You know what a geek I am. Daphne knows me from before she went over to DNR, which is I'm just so glad you're still in this space. But it couldn't the reverse be maybe how do we handle that as a legislative? I know how we have a process, but I'm wondering how we can get upstream more, literally, about you know, sometimes we have our recommendations, but there were some bills that, like the Navigator bill, stuff that wasn't on our priority list, but we voted to support that. So I'm wondering, when there's bills from the departments that are associated with the Forest Health Council, like the Forest, you know, the State Forest Service, DNR, if those are some that we think are forest health related, if we have a heads up or recommendations, so that maybe we can have this process sooner, that if there's bills that are associated that we want to be able to advocate for or support as a Forest Health Council. I wonder if, because, you know, right now we've been doing it like in the middle of the heat of the session when they pop up, and we like, hey, there's we need to put out a report, hey, we want to support this bill. And I know some of those pop up, you know, at the beginning of the session, but I wonder if there's ones that you all could flag for us to look at that, like the dredge and fill bill or something like that, that we could have discussions about early on and maybe make recommendations to the full council of which ones we think beyond our priorities, ones that we might want to support as a, like a, because I know it kind of gets on, you know, people ask, you know, who's supporting this or that. And so I'm just curious what that would look like.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I would say sometimes bills sort of pop out of nowhere and, you know, they get dropped without too much stakeholding done in advance and come a little bit as a surprise. And I feel like you do kind of have to just take it as it comes during the session if bills get introduced, and oftentimes entities like won't actually take a position until something's formally introduced. So I wouldn't necessarily feel like you guys are, you know, behind the 8 ball there or anything. I would say also, you know, generally we have an idea of what bills are coming forward close to the start of session. Like we did somewhat anticipate that there'd be something on WOTUS, for example. We didn't know any of the details or how that was going to play out, but I think, you know, between James and I, we can probably offer some sort of like presentation either towards the start of session or right before on like a few anticipated concepts, knowing that they may not happen or we might be missing some items, but we always kind of try to capture what we expect to happen in a session as much as we're able to. So, you know, if that kind of heads up would be helpful, certainly happy to explore that. But I also think, you know, as things get introduced during the session, that's probably a good time to consider when to actually take a position. It's typically not advisable to take a position on something before it's been formally introduced. Does that get to your question?
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Awesome. All right, so I'll just go through a couple of other tracks here that I identified, and this one's probably pretty obvious to you all, but just in case I wanted to bring it to your attention. But, you know, just external partners and entities have a lot of interest in the forestry wildfire space that you guys are working on. Obviously, there's a lot of active NGOs in this space. There's local government groups, there's environmental groups, there's just a whole host of different external entities that have the ability to initiate legislation. You know, if they were to do that, they would have to do the work of identifying sponsors and, you know, coming up with the actual policy details, doing the drafting and all of that. But that's certainly an avenue that that could happen. So I know, you know, some of you represent groups like that, and to the extent you want to share the annual report with, you know, some of those external entities for their consideration, I think that's fair game as well. And then the last one was really through a state agency, through DNR, through the Department of Public Safety. I think, as I understand it, this is kind of a new avenue that you guys are exploring this year, which is exciting, and really appreciate the work that has gone into lining up timelines so that we actually have the ability to consider those recommendations when it is the right time in our process. So, you know, similar to legislators, state agencies are typically held to that 5 bill limit. That's, for us, it's set by the governor's office. So we can submit 5 substantive bill concepts for potential governor's office approval every year, on top of, you know, just technical fixes. That doesn't count towards our 5 bill limit. So I think what that means is that we definitely acknowledge all of the time and effort that you guys put into developing these recommendations. We 100% see the value in them, but it's also important to recognize that for, you know, one reason or another, it's not necessarily a guarantee that a state agency is going to pick up a recommendation or several. You know, I would say especially if there's a recommendation that has budget implications. You all know that has been really tough, especially recently with, you know, really limited general fund dollars. I would say that's the reason Senate Bill 24009 didn't move forward this session. I would say it's probably also the reason the funding for the Live Wildfire Ready campaign bill got like slashed throughout the process. So the budget piece is definitely a really important consideration. On top of that, you know, DNR, other departments, we often have to pursue legislative fixes that, you know, continue to move programs and operations forward and sort of just like basic needs. So that's just, you know, all of that is to say that even if your recommendations are totally valuable and good policy ideas, we may not be able to prioritize them in any given year for one reason or another, but it's still a great avenue to pursue. And I think we appreciate the opportunity to consider the recommendations. So last thing I'll say on that track is that our process is very drawn out because of the different layers of approval that we go through. So just generally, the timeline is that we typically start thinking about legislation for the following year in like February and March. Our divisions, you know, the State Forest Service would submit initial drafts to us in April. And then they tend to hear back from DNR's executive director's office in May or June on what DNR wants to actually move forward as a proposal to the governor's office. And then we, the executive director's office, work with our divisions to make those proposals to the governor's office by July or August. And then we actually don't typically hear back from the governor's office until like late August into even late fall. So it's a really kind of fluid timeline. And I guess I mentioned that because it takes me to the question of what happens if two or several different tracks and avenues pick up a recommendation. And I think, you know, I would encourage you all to explore all of these avenues because it's not necessarily a problem if a recommendation gets picked up by different entities. So, you know, for example, if a state agency picks something up and the interim committee or an individual legislator does too, we would typically just join forces at some point, make it a shared priority, you know, so long as we can get on the same page about the details and you know, bill language and things like that. I think that happens all the time where folks are looking at the same policy concept and eventually they figure out that they're both looking at the same policy concept. And I would say more often than not, that leads to a complementary partnership, not necessarily, you know, a competition between them. And for us, you know, because I mentioned all those layers of approval, it could be that the State Forest Service is interested in picking something up and it doesn't get through DNR, or they submit something to us, it does get through DNR, but it doesn't get through the governor's office. And there are so many steps to get through that, you know, I think it's perfectly fine to have the state agencies consider recommendations while other entities are also considering them like that. If, you know, for whatever reason, a recommendation doesn't get through our layers of approval, it still has a chance to move forward elsewhere. And that kind of goes back to James's question where, you know, it's always encouraged in the legislative space to work with partners, to do stakeholding work. So if it didn't move forward through DNR's track, it doesn't necessarily mean we would be against it. It could just have been a budget consideration or something totally not related to the policy itself. So I think, you know, that's just an encouragement to look at all of these avenues and don't think of them as mutually exclusive. So I hope that helps. Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
So everybody, as you know, I'm a geek about legislative. So I have 3 questions real quick, and I'm not trying to overtalk everyone, so I don't see other hands coming up. So first, I'm glad you brought up that it's okay if they get taken up by other tracks, because they do. This happened to us as a bill in 2021 that we presented it, and then a Boulder County rep had a similar bill, and so we just combined all of the. It ended up being one bill together, and so it actually became a much stronger bill because it had so much support. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I've lived through that, so that has happened. Secondly, when you talked about now I lost my train of thought. With all these bills, and some of these might be taken up, but there's also some bills that might need to be tweaked or expanded on or had some kind of unintended consequence. Are those that are related that we wouldn't know as a Forest Health Council or Legislative Committee about those issues? And so those are some things that we also could consider to help support, because they may not be financial or fiscal note kind of related, or maybe they are. And I didn't know if those were somehow something that we could have information about that, you know, again, kind of recommendations from you all that, hey, this is something we might need to go back and expand, fix, that may not be part of our recommendation, but something that we might need to go back and tweak, or help tweak, or help support the tweak, or expansion or change. And I didn't know how that process, how we would be able to have some of those recommendations from the agencies before, you know, that too. And then thirdly, and I'll give you a lot of questions. We'll answer those two, then I'll answer the big, because the other one's a big question. So.
Sure. So I want to make sure I understand your question correctly. Is your question how the Forest Health Council can get guidance from the state agencies before they develop their recommendations?
No, I'm thinking if, as we're developing the recommendations, and then we talked about other things that we could support, other bills, like let's say we have the recommendations, but you talked about other ideas. Is that something that, let's say you feel like Senate Bill 5 needs to have a clarification, and that's something that we could, you guys were wanting to push that through, and that's something you could give us a heads up so that maybe we could come in and vote on to support that beyond our recommendations. You know, some of those things that are already done that you all need, that say, hey, we need to kind of change this language, or help support, clarify and support this, is those are be easy things for us to come and support as a Forest Health Council. Does that make sense? And so that how can we have some information on that, so we as a Forest Health Council can kind of lend our collective voices in support. And I just, so I'll let James, and then I see James' hands is up. Just curious.
Go ahead, James.
I was going to say, I think we do that already, Commissioner, but I'm willing to be maybe more engaged, because Daphne is really good at giving me just big DNR legislative updates. And I specifically tend to give the legislative update to this group on forestry related. If this committee wants me to, I can probably elaborate to some of that watershed health, some of that other space too, because I think the question you're trying to get answered is like, if there are other bills that this committee might want to take a support position or an amend position, that you just have the opportunity to know what else is out there, apart from like, this is what the Wildfire Review Committee put out there, and this is what we're tracking. It's like, hey, maybe we did want to touch base on dredge and fill, and I'd be happy to kind of like get some ideas from this group, and then as Daphne's giving that much larger DNR presentation, I could be like, this might be interest to this group, and bring it back to you guys. And then you guys can have your internal discussions of like, maybe we want to support this one, or maybe we just want to keep monitoring that one. Is that what you're getting at, Commissioner?
Yeah, and just say that, you know, if they're, and of course they have to have that nexus to forest health, but now, you know, we know watershed health is part of forest health, right? But let's say that in implementation, you as all the agencies say, hey, there's a legislative fix we need to have that as well, but that point as well, and the legislative fix for this, that would be, you know, we don't know those things as a council. I mean, I might hear whispers about it, but you all are in the boots on the ground, you know, knowing how this is implemented, and we may not know there needs to be a fix or a tweak or an addition or something like that. And so I didn't know if that was, some of the agencies know that even something like that would be something, and I don't know, I'm not speaking for the council, but it's something that we all could be supportive as well too, going back and trying to make sure things are strengthened or clarified. Go ahead.
I take my direction. I understand 100% what you're saying, Commissioner. I think if there are those tweaks that at least our agency is looking for, and some of that, the first person I'm going to go to is Daphne. I don't think it's going to be anybody on this council. Not that I don't welcome that feedback, but like acting as a division of DNR, I don't want to get ahead of that process. And so I think that first kind of, as we're like implementing or going through, I'll be like, hey, Daphne, I think this is what we're pursuing. So I'm just going to say that's at least what the agency's doing. I don't know where we go from there, but I definitely understand that questions, because my first point of contact would probably be to the department to make sure that they understand where we are as an agency. And so we don't get ahead of anything else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of anything, but if those are things that like Daphne, it gets through the process and it's, because I've been on some of those bills supporting as an individual commissioner that we had to go back and clarify the intent of the bill or tweak some language, like the tiny home stuff that I've been working on, right? It's there's all these little tweaks that happen. And so I'm glad to hear that we have some other avenues, and I hear from the agencies how we can support the work through I mean, this sounds like we have a little bit more opportunities to maybe support and more upstream support those bills once it goes through the process and you guys identify those things that are related to Forest Health. I'm sorry to ask so many questions. So, and I forgot my other question now that I asked you. Do you remember?
I don't know if I do remember. I was just going to echo James's sentiment. You know, I think it would probably be most appropriate for us to bring you all any related legislative items after we have the governor's office approval, because the one thing that I wouldn't want to have happen is to flag a policy need for you all and then not have a final approval on it and just be like, oh, never mind. So it does just make sense, I think, to wait for that to play out. But yeah, Commissioner, I'm not sure what your last question was. I apologize.
Well, that's all right. I have lots of them. So my other there was the third one I was waiting, but maybe it'll pop back in, and if anyone else remembers my other question. But Phil, you know, just as a high level, 50,000 foot level, we have recommendations that we work very hard on, and we believe that was important, and we go through this whole process, and they're there for a reason. But some of them, I mean, most legislation, not all, has a price tag, and so my question is, we don't know that price tag, but my question is, some of the legislators have been, after the session, of course, saying, well, next year, and not specific to us, but just in general, do not ask us to run any bills with any kind of fiscal note. And I know that's a big general question, but I just thought that's just any kind of bill, any kind of space, right? And I just thought, well, wow, that kind of, you know, should we not tell you what we think, you know, these are important concepts and things. And so what is your recommendation? Maybe this is outside the scope of what we need to talk about, but I wouldn't think we want to, as a council, limit our recommendations or our conversations or what we recommend by kind of the forecasting of the session, of the next session. Would that be a fair thing, that we should just focus still on our recommendations no matter? I mean, we're not going to ask for $100 million out of the budget, but, you know, I mean, just joking, but you know what I'm saying? It's just, I'm just curious about what all of you think about. We should still stay in our process and not try to think about what probably won't, because I feel like if we don't make the recommendations and keep pushing on these needs, they won't stay urgent and urgent and priority if we don't keep talking about the need, if that makes sense. So I'm just curious, does that make sense, my question?
Yeah, completely. And I think, to your point, like, there's still value in coming up with those recommendations, just for like the education that it provides to members on what the needs are. You know, we get that question all the time, like, what are the gaps? And I think they want to know where the funding gaps are too, even if we're in a budget year where, you know, there's a realistic, you know, we just can't do it this year. So, you know, something to think about is, as you're developing those recommendations, it's helpful, I think, for legislators if it's not strictly a funding ask, like if it's a funding ask that is paired with a policy need, or you know, a recommendation where the policy need moving forward without the funding could still work, especially in this time when we're in like very tight budget years. I think, you know, that's something to think about. It's I wouldn't discourage you from making those funding recommendations and educating folks about where those needs are. But, you know, I think that the recommendations with a lower or no fiscal impact certainly have a better chance of getting picked up, just given the current environment we're in.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to ask so many questions, but you've got my head kind of thinking about opportunities. So anyone else have any questions? James?
Just one. And maybe they already do this, Courtney and Daphne. Does Dan give that legislative report to someone in the governor's office? Because I'm just thinking out loud, like if this committee is charged with advising the governor through the department, I wonder if there's a different avenue for maybe the governor to be like, hey, I like this idea. And then it's like a governor bill or something like that. Do you know if he provides that to someone there?
I think we do provide it to the policy team. I don't know that it goes directly to the governor himself, but yes, it goes to the policy team.
Perfect.
Mr. Morgan, great question, James.
One comment or question, I guess. We don't want to be doing bills with financial price tags to them, was what I just was listening to. But some of the most urgent needs we have for forest health may not have a price tag directly to the legislature, but they have huge financial implications, and to all different agencies and to private industry and the public as a whole. And some of the things that we most need to deal with to get a legislative fix would really far surpass the cost of any individual ask to the legislature. For example, we've danced around this for a long time, but Colorado still has no state agency or a liability relief for land management activities. And it was lost after the lower North Fork. And the financial implications for that throughout the legal industry is huge. And so I guess my question is, or comment or question is, when and what point do we address that? And do we address the economics of it? Because that's what people are going to want to see. It's not going to be a bill with a price tag, but that's one sooner or later this state is going to have to take on. And we've been dancing around it for several years. And another one is going to be, right, and it ties right back to forest health, is our policies on utilization, or it's a conversation again that we're dancing around, but we're having big impacts right now is how we're going to handle biomass and what we're going to do with it and what the agencies are going to request and how they're going to write it up. It's their policies. As you try to get your work done, their policies can affect the outcome of doing this work for literally several $100 million statewide. So I guess what I'm asking here, that's a legislative fix we're going to ask for. It's not going to have a price tag, but there will be some cost to it just to do the homework that I think the legislators are going to ask for. So we tend to just do some finite studies that really don't get to the base of that. I guess I'm kind of floundering here, but I see the problem, and I'm really interested in getting a fix. But any suggestions, any ideas? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say, we are in a really tight budget environment with general fund dollars right now, but that's not always as tight as it is right now. So if there are ideas that you all continue to see value in and they don't get picked up in a given year because of budget constraints, like keep including them. That's one approach. The other thing I would say is, general fund dollars are really where that tightness comes in. So to the extent you all want to put some thought towards policy recommendations for new innovative funding sources or something like that could really help, build some capacity and funding availability for these concepts. And I think legislators are always interested in new, creative, innovative funding opportunities. So, looking at how some other states fund their programs or things like that beyond just the state general fund dollars, that's always a good a good thing to explore, because I think that there's just so many demands on those general fund dollars that it's going to be an ongoing challenge. And then the last thing I would say is there are very tight general fund dollars, but there are general fund dollars. So, for context, last year was a very tight budget year. And if I remember correctly, they had somewhere around $20 million to essentially like play with for legislative items. It was like the legislative bucket that was available after the Joint Budget Committee went through its entire process, came up with, you know, the long bill and all of the various different budget requests. So that's really where advocacy comes in, because $20 million seems like a lot, but when you're thinking about the, you know, 500 plus bills that get passed in a session, many of which have funding demands, that's really like nothing. So it kind of becomes a bit of a like Hunger Games scenario for like lack of a better comparison. But to the extent that, you know, something's running through the process and you all can, you know, bring your voices to the legislature or encourage others to bring voices to the legislature and emphasize the importance of a bill that's running through the process, you know, you're in that competition for the limited 20 million or whatever it is in any given year, but you still have a chance of accessing some funds through that.
Great question, Mr. Morgan. All right. Any other questions for Daphne? And we can always, if you're like me and wake up at 4 a.m. with a question, thinking, oh, I should ask that. We can always send them to Courtney and she can forward them on to Daphne. And I know that Daphne would be more than happy. Sorry to speak for you, Daphne, but I know that you're always willing to answer questions and support. So I think this has been a great, you know, Christy had a comment. I think we go back to our mission. Our mission doesn't tell us to make only if they don't cost money. And I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting we don't make recommendations that don't cost money. I'm just saying, you know, I think the legislators were feeling a little worn down when they were calling and talking to me. And I think the Hunger Games aspect is I've heard that said many times the last 2 weeks from folks. And so I was just saying, I feel strongly that we should still make the recommendations. If they are the recommendations and what we think needs to happen, we need to still put that in front and keep pushing and keep talking about the priorities that we see and that we hear, because if we don't, other priorities, there are lots of competing priorities in the state legislature, and I can name a dozen right now. And so if we don't keep talking and bringing this up and pushing and raising this priority and this urgency, and stay kind of visible and vocal, I think that will kind of, this will lose until there's smoke in the air again, which I hope there isn't, but there just was. This will not be, this won't seem as, it won't be as on the top priorities. So I just feel like, I'm not suggesting we don't, it's just, I just want to kind of that reality of, you know, I think some of them are thinking, you know, would love to run bills without, but I think we have lots of recommendations that they could find pieces to do. But I appreciate everything you've shared today, Daphne, and thank you, Courtney, for suggesting this. This is great for us just to kind of revisit this a little bit. Any other, and Christy, I think your point was well taken. And Mr. Morgan, everyone, great questions, great comments today. Any other burning thoughts, ideas? Otherwise, we'll let Daphne get back to her Friday. Awesome. Thank you, Daphne.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a great rest of your day.
Great to see you.
Bye.
Okay, so that took a little longer than I thought, but I think it was a good conversation. So we might not get through our full agenda today. I hope you don't mind that, but let's move on quick to kind of that timeline and discussion of formation of details. So I don't know if Courtney, you want to start with that. And I guess the question I have just ahead of that is, when do we think the report's going to come out that we could be sharing it with everyone? Is that before the interim? That would be for the interim committee?
Yes,
The
I think
report.
I don't have the exact date that the interim committee starts meeting. I think it might be the end of August. James, is that right?
Our first committee meeting is July 2nd.
Yeah, that's the reason I asked, because, you know, I had a meeting with Senator Cutter, had a bunch of us individually, and Chief Moore and all that in a meeting recently. And to me, that sounded like that timeline was way earlier than I remembered it. So I'm just curious. And because I was kind of trying to find out when they were looking for us to be, my schedule is getting. So I'm like, when do you think, because I had the chair in front of me, when do you think you might have the Forest Health Council in front of you? So just curious. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good question. In the past, Angela and I had worked on the annual report sort of in August, and we're sharing it out at the end of the summer. What I was thinking was that in July, at the July 24th Forest Health Council meeting, this committee might be recommending some updates to the legislative recommendations. I know one of them around education for the high school and middle schoolers that we're now thinking might go through extension, that there might be some updates. If this committee is still imagining that there might be some updates, we would need to have that meeting in July and then the report be completed after that. And I can have the report almost complete so that once that meeting occurs, I can just sort of update the recommendation language. So maybe the end of July, early August, we could have the report completed. If you guys are wanting a different timeline, I'm happy to work on a different timeline and try to have the report completed earlier, if you think that's important.
I'm not suggesting that. I just thought, well, in case we're wanting to have that to hand, but I think if we have the recommendations, fine tune or finalized by then, that's kind of the important piece. So I'm just curious about that. So, yeah, so I'm just curious. So, because it makes it, if they're meeting earlier, then that kind of changes things a little bit. So.
There, I will say, at least for this first meeting, the direction that we got is it's agency updates. It's like who's the State Forest Service, who's DFPC, who's DNR, and like who are these other entities. I'm looking at and I'm sending it to everybody in the chat, but I think the time frame works well, only because I think Senator Cutter is putting more meetings on the calendar than Representative Velasco did last year. And Courtney, I don't know how fast a turnaround could be, but I know that there is a meeting on July 30th. So depending on what the Forest Health Council full council does on that July 24th meeting, there might be an opportunity to have like everything pre-ordered, pre-ready, and then to do the fine tuning on July 24th and have that ready to go, because after that July 30th meeting, we can have that July 30th meeting, and there's 2 additional meetings on August and 1 in September. So I don't think you need to super rush right now, because there are some opportunities for that report to go to them in time.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Courtney.
Okay, some other thoughts about the annual report is that I actually remember that the Full Forest Health Council does need to approve the annual report. So the fact that we're going to spend the July 24th meeting tweaking the legislative recommendation means that it can't also be the meeting where the report is approved. What we've done in the past is called sort of a supplementary Forest Health Council meeting, a 20-minute meeting just for people to approve the annual report. I think we did that last year. So maybe that's something that we can schedule late July, early August to approve the report and then still have it presented. It would also be possible before the annual report is approved, but the recommendations are approved, for you to present. So perhaps on the 24th, the recommendations are tweaked. On the 30th, they're presented. Then in early August, we have a 30-minute council meeting. We approve the annual report, and then it can be sent to all of the committee members. I know it would be nice if it all happened together. But if let's see, August 13th, I wonder do people think August 13th is too late to get on the committee's agenda? Is it all right just to wait and try to present on August 13th? I don't know if there's a benefit to going earlier, to going on July 30th.
I'm not sure when she was planning to have, and the only reason is because she invited several commissioners from around the state to that meeting, right? And so I don't know what the chair's planning. So I think that would be a great, and I'm looking at the time, so I want to, but I think that we need to, I don't want to extend the meetings every time. So I just want to say maybe we should find out those dates and, because I think that kind of, and it sounds like that's something we should also consider in the timeline is, the chair might be moving things up and around that time. So, which is out of our control, but we might need to have some flexibility. So I'm just, I think if we could find out if she's planning the 30th or the 13th, that would really help, right?
Yes, I will. I'm not exactly sure how the agendas are set for the Wildfire Matters Interim Committee, but I'm sure I can work with James and Daphne to understand how the Forest Health Council would get invited and which meeting they might want a presentation from the council on.
Yeah, let's see if we can find that out. That would be great. So we're almost out of time, and I don't want to always, I feel like the agenda items we have, unless anyone has a burning desire, we could probably put off and just repeat the agenda for next time and continue these items, because I think that was an important conversation to have, that we did have. So I'm also, I think, I want everyone to kind of, maybe we can resend out our legislative priorities to everyone. And I think that would be really important for us to kind of talk and think about before we have the July 24th. Do we want to suggest that more detailed? We haven't really formally approved or said we want to look at that. So we need to kind of have that kind of conversation and discussion. I think that will take a little bit of time. Also looking at the other recommendations, whether we want to add more detail or more information onto before we have that meeting. So I'm just curious, would everyone be okay if we just pause this agenda and take that and move this on and just go ahead and end on time today and continue this conversation in our next meeting, which would be, when would that be? I'm looking, sorry, too many screens up today. Anybody have that in front of them?
It's the next meeting is scheduled for June 28th.
Yeah. So does that work for everyone?
Okay.
Right. Sorry, I'm trying to find my screen. Where are you all? There you are. Does that work for everyone? Okay.
All right, with me.
So I don't want to have, I guess I'm asking for homework. If you all could just look at the recommendations and think about the presentation. I think you have the spreadsheet from Extension and 4-H, and because that's a little more formal set out kind of thing. And I think this actually from already the responses from us and from some folks that this might be a very interested in idea. So I just wanted to kind of make sure we kind of look at those again and revisit those before we kind of have those, we represent those in front of the July 24th. So curious, real quick, I guess I didn't read the email, but I don't know if anyone else has this question. Are we getting reimbursed for overnight stay up in Linwood? Is there a per diem or help with that for the Forest Health Council, or I just remember, so. Yes.
Yes.
So we have that. So we have those, we'll get reimbursed and have the forms later. Is that correct?
It's the same process. I don't know if it's like those forms but yes, it's going to be the same process that you did for the other meetings, that there's travel associated with it. The State Forest Service is covering this upcoming meeting as well.
Great. And yeah, we'll send out the homework beforehand or for the update, and we'll remind everyone and have those, because I think it'll be the same agenda. So we'll get that out earlier. Okay. I hope everyone felt this was helpful. It sounds like we have a few more avenues as a Forest Health Council to support and advocate. And so I'm hoping you all felt that was helpful to have that conversation. So any other big ideas? Oh, and by then, I'm hoping, as you know, Larimer County is doing a study on biomass with an out of county consultant, and they're turning around looking at all these ideas. It's a $200,000 study we were awarded through the state, And if you're all open to that, when that report gets done, be more than happy to have them come present our findings to this committee if you're interested. So I haven't gotten any updates on that yet, but I know where they've been, and it's been very interesting conversation. So if you're interested, it probably won't be until the fall, but if you're all interested, we're trying to grapple the same question, but we're trying to find some answers. So just if you're interested in that, we'd be more than happy to have that on the agenda item if you're interested. So, all right. Thank you all for your patience and your time, and hope you have a great weekend. Any other questions, comments?
Do we need a motion to adjourn or?
Yep, I'm getting that. Just want to make sure I didn't want to cut you off. So I'm looking for a motion to adjourn in a
You
second.
got it.
I'll second.
That, awesome. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.